Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the Ultimate RPG. Now this is a Fun Friday video. So what I want you to take from that is, I don't know how to make this RPG, but I can certainly point you in the direction of this RPG. Hopefully one of you out there will find it. It's a very simple question, I think, to answer, but way more difficult to execute. Basically, how can you make the Ultimate RPG? It's simple. Make the non-violence options in that RPG just as rich and fun as the violent ones. And I think you'll have the Ultimate RPG. Of course, that doesn't happen. Most games out there, the violence is not as simple as you shoot someone once and they fall over dead. I talked about having this problem when we were making Fallout, because we were on top of GURPS. And the GURPS back then had a tendency, and we saw this in playtest, of the player would be shot at, but his passive dodge skill would avoid the shot. Until finally he was shot, and usually that either killed him in one shot, or he was so hurt that the next shot would kill them. So instead of the D&D of, oh, I'm hit. Oh, I'm a little hurt. Oh, I'm hit again. I'm a little more hurt. I'm a little more hurt. Oh, I better get out of here or I better heal. What we saw was this. Miss, 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 dead. Or almost dead. And the way GURPS worked, when you took damage, all your skills were reduced by that. So doing anything to mitigate it in the very next turn or even trying to attack back was really hard to do. Now, there are a lot of RPGs out there, and I think this is why people react to tending to do more of the violence options than the non-violent one, because the violence options are richer, combat is richer. There's a lot of RPGs out there that treat non-violence in that very discreet way. I know people have talked about this. You're having a dialogue, and there's a skill check that says speech 70, and you get your speech up to 70, and bam, you can say that line. Similarly with stealth, you're walking along, there's a door. Is your lockpick 70? Boom, you can open it. It's not 70, boom, you can't. There's a lot of games that treat nonviolence in that very discreet way instead of a continuous way with a lot of rich player interaction. Let's just call that progression. There's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of player choice. There's a lot of things the player have to do to work at getting the ultimate goal. Combat has that. Usually things have hit points. You have different weapons you can use, different places you can shoot at, different choices you can make in cover, and all these different choices you can make in combat. What's needed is that kind of progression in the other systems. This could be anything from you have to gather evidence before you can unlock a line in dialogue. Maybe you have to scour scenes for clues. Maybe you have to talk to people and you get information from them. Maybe there's books that you have to go through and you actually have to read. You can't just pick up the book. You actually have to open it, read it, get to that section, and then it's like, ooh, you just read that in this diary that there was a ghost coming at night, something like that. Or maybe there's even a computer that you have to get into, hack into, find some clue. Dialogue can also consist of convincing people. Maybe someone has a clue and just not talking to them is enough. You need to convince them. You need to have dialogue skills that let you convince them even to give you a clue. And maybe there's things you have to do for them. Maybe they want you to do a quest. In other words, there's a rich set of actions that you have to do in order to get someone convinced. And not just, I have a high speech skill. Hey, you want to join my team? Yes. It has to be something richer than that. Stealth is the same way. You not only have to sneak past guards, but you may have to disarm traps. You have to pick locks. You have to find a way through that maybe avoids security cameras and sends you through vents or has you crawl through ceiling panels and things like that. Some RPGs do have progression systems like that, but I can't think of a single one that when adding progression like that didn't lose something else. And I'm going to break down for a second and actually give you examples. People always say, you don't give examples. I'm not complaining about these games. I'm basically saying none of these are what I would consider the ultimate RPG. Let's look at mine, Fallout. Fallout had dialogue that needed evidence. You couldn't just walk up to the master and say, mutants are sterile, I win. You needed a high speech skill to even say that line, but that line would not show up unless you had gathered all the evidence. Mainly, you had to interact with the scientist Free at the Brotherhood of Steel, and she had you go look for things, and then she told you what her findings were, and only then could you go to the master with a high speech skill and convince him. But guess what? There was no dialogue UI support for that, and there weren't a lot of things like that everywhere in the game. So we had those options because we wanted the game to be nonlinear, but I don't think they were supported as well. Similarly, or I should say opposite end of that, you have Disco Elysium, which I know a lot of you loved. It has great dialogue and a great dialogue system, but it has almost no combat. In fact, for a lot of you, you never experienced combat. And then for a few of you, the others, you maybe had combat once. So that supports my thing. If you can be great at one of these, but then nobody's good at all of them. I could continue the old Thief games, or Hitman, or even the more recent Indiana Jones, the Great Circle game. These all had stealth in them, but they don't have dialogue skills. In fact, a lot of them don't even have dialogue. You don't talk to people. You don't get into a dialogue with people and work things out. The game is designed for you to explore and stealth and occasionally do some combat, but there's no dialogue in there. So these are all great games, but none of them are what I would consider to be the ultimate RPG. So let's talk about why I think we haven't found all three of those fully realized in any RPG to date. I'm just going to tell you the first one, which you already know if you've watched any of my channels: time and money. Getting all of those systems really rich, with tons of progression, well balanced. Time, money. It's just, you're going to have a big bag of loot to make a game like this. And then, even then, if you do this, people will tend to use just one of them, which means a person on a playthrough won't see all the work you put into all the different paths. They only see the one they did. A lot of people don't replay games as much as they used to. Some of them do, and then they talk about, hey, this is great, how rich it is. But when we were making Outer Worlds, I wanted to lock companions behind one of the leadership skills, and I was told no, because we were putting so much work into the companions that restricting them to players who bought leadership skills was a bad idea. And I was going to make it like the lowest leadership purchase unlocked one companion, and then you needed a higher one to unlock two. We were told no, we always want two, because we put a lot of work not only into the companions and their combat abilities and their dialogues, but they also talked with each other. And that was one of the things that was added richly to the lore of the world, where as you were walking around, sometimes your companions would talk to each other and comment on things. And it was different with the different companions you had. So restricting that, I was basically told by someone above me, we can't do all that work and then restrict it. Also, and I'm not going to get into the details why, but most people choose violence. When given all the options, most people go violence. Some of them say, well, that's because it's the richest system, and maybe that's true. But I still bet if you made all these systems, a lot of people would still choose violence. Another reason you tend not to see all of these in one game is there's a lot of sub-reasons. I will say this is, there's a lot of conflicting design priorities to get dialogue, stealth, and combat all richly implemented in one game. These design priorities are all over the place. Maybe it's because once you add violence and you can kill people, that conflicts a lot with evidence gathering. It's hard to talk to someone who's dead. It's hard to find out what, this character knows, this NPC knows if they're dead. That's one of the reasons we added Speak with Dead in Arcanum, so that you could talk to someone even after they were dead and find out what they were supposed to tell you. It's also really hard to make a HUD that is clean and useful for everything you want to do. So a HUD that's really clean and useful and makes combat really easy and fun to do may not be the same HUD you want for evidence gathering. Again, it's why in Murder on Eridanos, we had that gun you could look through, and that's where the clues would be, because that was something you did outside of combat, and it was its own UI. But coming up with those things is difficult, and it's a lot of extra work to make an entirely new HUD that people only use temporarily or for parts of the game. Another thing is, it may be hard to display a dialogue response that is locked behind lots of objectives. If you're supposed to gather a bunch of evidence, have a bunch of people convinced before something unlocks, it may be hard to display that compared to just need speech 70. So that's something that's like a UI complexity that's going to have to be solved in this Ultimate RPG. And then the quest progression UI is going to be very complex if you can solve a quest in different ways. We had this problem in a lot of our games where we'd say you could do A or B to solve a quest, but quest below it you had both of those objectives, and once one of them was achieved, it would gray out the other. That confused people. Sometimes people saw all the things that were below the quest as I need all these things. So then you have a mix of ands and ors. Not everybody likes logic like that. It is a UI complexity that would have to be resolved if you want to have all of the different systems as rich in progression as each other in the same game. And then finally, the reason you often don't see all these in the same game is finding designers who are good at all three. That's a unicorn. That is a design unicorn. So what you end up having to do is finding, well, this is a good combat designer. Here's a good narrative designer. Oh, here's a really good stealth designer. And then you have to hope that those people like working together, can work together, will work together on things like UI, where things come to a head and it's like, well, the combat person's saying the HUD has to be like this, and the dialogue person is saying it's like this, and someone has to step in, and then that's going to be the game director. And unless he's a unicorn who's good at all three of these, the game director may tend to lean towards one over the other. So that's why you sometimes don't find all these in one game. By the way, is there a unicorn out there, a design unicorn out there who's good at all three of them? I hope so. Because will it happen? Will this amazing Ultimate RPG ever be made? I hope so. That's what I want to play. Somewhere out there is a design that unifies all of these systems into one single, coherent, fun, progressive, Ultimate RPG. I hope when that's made, the designer who does that, who figures it out, expresses gratitude for all the work of all the games that came before. It's like what Isaac Newton said. Has a quote, "If I've seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants." And by the way, if you're that designer, if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you make this Ultimate RPG, thank you. I look forward to playing it.